I don't know. I've just been obsessed with the idea of just this little thing in EVE Online. Yeah, it's Imagine time, just for a few minutes. Again, I'll mention it again, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit about EVE with you guys. I know just a tiny little part. I don't know a lot about it. I've been watching this guy on YouTube play EVE, and all he does is cargo haul. And he talks about how he takes contracts from one part of the game to another part of the game, but he also plays the market in this system. So it's the idea of kind of the direction we're going in the game right now with persistent hangars, freight elevators, cargo missions versus commodity trading, right? You could make the Excel simulator jokes. You could do all that stuff. EVE has its problems, but let's just look at some of the things that work really well and the things that don't, right? We'll ignore. And what are the things that like work really well that can be applied to Star Citizen? And I think what you want out of Star Citizen is more player engagement. They call it an MMO, but it's not an MMO yet. Doesn't feel like one. Doesn't feel like one from a standpoint of how many players are in each server that you're in, sure, but doesn't feel like one from the player interaction standpoint at all. There are no systems in game that really do a great job of supporting player interaction at the moment, right? So let's also ignore the fact that there's a million things that need to happen to make Star Citizen like a great game or have the economy that EVE has. Also, let's ignore the fact that EVE is a completely sandbox player-driven economy where Star Citizen is not and won't be, right? I do want it to be more of one, and that's what I want to touch on now, right? There are a few systems in game that could be built upon and like built up a little bit more than they are now that I find to be really cool. And it's the fact that, at least for the moment, maybe crafting or something like that will help this stuff. Certain valuable commodities are only purchased in one area, right? The game is too small at the moment in the sense of it's so big, but it's so small because it's just the one system, right? Where the best quantum drives and shields, and most of them are all in one place. They're all at Orison. What Star Citizen doesn't do well is doesn't create the reason for you to take those things and deliver them somewhere else, right? There's all these like made up reasons in the game to take commodities from one place or another. There are no made up reasons in game to take components from one large place to another, right? You know, whether it's OEL or whatever, OEM stations, the ones that are above cities or the cities themselves, right? There's no purpose to that. There's no market being played. So the number one thing that I want to see out of the game in the next couple of years would be like a market of some kind. But what needs to come before a market is things that matter, right? For right now, the upgrades, the only upgrades in game and theoretically or in any sort of capacity are for your ships. And they're very small, they're very cheap, and you can't lose them. So a lot has to change around that, right? Whether, you know, a blacked out component, so down to 0 health, is not repairable, is completely dead at some point, which it does appear, if you guys look at the patch notes for engineering, is going away. That the idea of a blacked out component dying completely is probably not a good idea given how fast components black out, at least at the current time. So the idea of repairing them and then them degrading could be a thing, or elsewhere. But let's touch on what EVE does well. EVE does a thing, and again, I have a limited knowledge of this, where a player logs in and looks at a contract board that's made entirely by players, think opening your mobiGlas and looking at the beacon section of your mobiGlas. That would be player contracts. They could rename it, right? And you look down the list and you go, I'm getting paid 10 million to move 1 billion credits worth of cargo. And what that 1 billion credits worth of cargo means, please correct me if I'm wrong on this one, guys. This is the part that I'm super confused about. You, as the cargo hauler, do not know what's in the boxes. You do not know. The player who makes the contract says there's 1 billion worth of credits. You, as the hauler, has the option to fail the contract, open the containers, and steal that stuff and sell it for potentially 1.5 billion if the stuff that's in there is worth more. So it's what the player's telling you it's worth. So that's an option, right? So it's this weird piracy thing that can happen as well. But I want to touch on the idea of that's the insurance for the player who makes the contract. Can you send the link for the Eve YouTuber? His name's Marquis Dragon. He has the biggest bounty on his head of anybody in the entire game, apparently. But yeah, so the idea of that insurance I find to be very cool because it can play in multiple directions. But more importantly, what I see is players using players to cargo haul items of value throughout the game. And I find that to be so cool. And what's missing from Star Citizen is items of value. Because what's not missing from Star Citizen is players not wanting to do that stuff, right? There's plenty of PvPers, there's plenty of players who are not interested in cargo that can utilize players who are, right? And that's a big part of the game that we're missing. And with all of the things that are happening, we know there's commodity trading, which is kind of playing the market in EVE. We know there's missions that are going to be given to us by NPCs that are largely going to be made up. Like, as far as we know, it sounds like they're trying to make sense of the contracts you're doing. But what we need is player-to-player contracts, just like I'm watching. The content that I'm watching from this guy, incredibly boring if you think about it, right? He's just jumping from one place to another, rarely ever gets attacked. But the thing that I find interesting is his discussion around what he's doing, right? Commodity trading is 100% high risk, only 20 to 30% ROI. 20 to 30% ROI is incredibly high, right? If you think about like people's retirement accounts and stuff like that. I'm not sure what ROI you're really looking for. I don't know what kind of ROI is in EVE on their commodity trading and things like that. I doubt it's 20 to 30%. Maybe it is. But yeah. It's just something that I just want to see really thought about. I want to see it really built up over the next little while, especially knowing what they're considering working on now, which is the freight elevators and cargo missions. How are we going to make these matter for us, right? Well, yeah, Star Citizen needs one big... You know what? Let's mention that as well. Obviously, Star Citizen needs more players in a server and server meshing. EVE works because it's a global... Like, there's one game. It's EVE. There's one server. There's not... We're not all split up into these micro servers that we're in now, right? Yeah, and it's also player-driven. I think Star Citizen can have some success with elements of a player-driven game. It doesn't have to be entirely player-driven. We've played plenty of games that have economies that aren't, right? Entirely player-driven. WoW, and others, where you go and you kill NPCs and gather stuff. Is that considered player-driven economies? Right, everything isn't crafted. There's drops, there's things like that exist as well in those games. But I think Star Citizen can have so much, like, just think about the more boring professions and how to make them interesting, how to make them make sense. How is this not one of them, right? How is making players working together easier not the right way to go, right? You can argue against it in every way possible, but I just don't know how. I don't know how you can. It's just makes so much sense to me. You want to be an arms dealer? Gimme. I mean, I already am an arms dealer. So I can give that example of what we do in game is we have relationships with large PvP orgs, and we go and gather guns because players don't feel like doing that, right? And it is a pain in the ass. I'll tell you this, because this is the workarounds we have to do to make it work. A singular player, and now in this case a few players, have access to the guns, but every player in our org that is gathering them has to work on that player's time. Everybody gives him the guns. He schedules a drop with one player in their org, and it's not this automated system where an org says, hey, I would like 35 railguns. We can't craft them, and we don't have an automated delivery option to just deliver them, right? So that's the other thing that needs to exist with this idea of a contract system, is things being automated, right? Where we bring them to a place, we drop them off, and the contract is complete. We get our money, they get their guns, or we get our money, they get whatever they want, right? It's a pain. Oh, yeah, Nemesis. So reading, how about sell one piece of 135 pile? How, like, it takes hours to sell the, weapons and things that you looted. Antisocial mode, nah. Fair. Right? Fair. Let me think on this. My philosophy around discussions around life, Star Citizen, everything are, if I can't make a logical argument against you, you're right. What would the benefit be? I'm just trying to think of the logical benefit of forcing players to work on each other's time versus players being able to play the game on their time. Right? Is it antisocial? Is this antisocial? Technically, yes. But it is more social than the game we have now, where you interact with the game only and no other players. Where in this case, you would be doing something for another player. Have a higher tax on the auction house to incentivize trading socially? Sure. Absolutely. Right? Asynchronous is better. That's why working from home is so popular. You can interact with players you want and can provide goods to all. Yeah, I think overall it's a better thing for the game overall to allow for things to be done on your time over the course of multiple days. As far as I know, you can set the amount of days it takes for that contract to be completed as well. Days, right? They don't have to happen instantly. You got to remember, Star Citizen hopefully is going to be a much larger game. Jumping from Pyro to Stanton is going to take more time than traveling from Crusader to Hurston, right? It's just going to take more time. How wouldn't it? I don't know how big Star Citizen is going to get, right? But yeah, Eco's good for social economic gameplay. It is. For people who don't know Eco, it's a really cool game from that standpoint. But okay, here's an example from Eve that people know. An org is building a new Keepstar. Don't know what that is, but a big thing, I'm guessing. They will put a bunch of contracts for commodities they need to build it, but sometimes they don't want other orgs to know what they're building. So they will be back channeled with courier orgs to deliver goods clandestine. I can't say that word for some reason. Clandestinely. Yeah. So all we're saying is there should be another type of contract that is a private one. And then the social aspects exist more. With base building, players can set up shops. Yes, but then you get down that slippery slope of antisocial gameplay. Right? If you're going to my shop and I'm going to your shop and everything happens offline and we're never interacting with each other, it's that's how Ultima Online worked. And it was convenient, but it wasn't. It was starting to feel not like an MMO, So I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. That is something that is so simple. It is so simple. I don't know how simple it will be to set up, game development wise, but in terms of understanding for a player on both sides of the equation, it's so simple. Right? Asocial, not antisocial. Fair. Okay. I just think it's cool. I think crafting will be a multiplayer experience and would avoid most asocial loops. I mean, you're just interacting with a panel most likely. So we'll see. We'll see. But it's something that just... I'm getting high on the copium for this stuff. It's something I want to see. It's something I want to see. It's not something I'm sure I will see. Right? It's something that I think theoretically could be possible. But as always with Star Citizen, we have zero understanding of the vision of the game. Partly because they probably have zero understanding of the overall vision of the game. I think, basically the letter for the chairman admitted that the plan is to figure out what the vision for 1.0 is, which is the vision of the game. And they'll go from there, right? So they're having conversations and meetings trying to figure out what the vision of the game will be. Or make org-based storage so it will be easier. You could do that now. So it is technically against TOS, but I ran it through a few channels and they don't seem to care. I have a separate account with a nothing ship on it that's named my org. I've given access to that account to the leadership in my org. They all are capable of logging into that account. Whenever that account is logged in, I assume everyone in your org can access it because you have to be in a party. You open the party with everybody. Everyone now has access to that org account. Everyone has access to that org hangar. And then everyone has access to the org-based storage. Done. Right? That's how you do that. The only issue is you're going to have to buy a large shipping game to get the largest hangar to get the most amount of storage. Right? So that's how you have an org account in game. It is not perfect. Having the multi-box is impossible now for me. Yeah, it's super shitty workaround, but hopefully they address it at some point, right? We'll have to see. Potential Star Citizen example. I have a mining outpost where I mine and refine materials. I need to sell the SCU stuff I produce, but don't want to haul it. Put the contract and have 250 SCU of barrel for sale. Pretty simple. Now, I think what people are forgetting. No, I can't do the org op. I have to leave in like half an hour. That's why I'm not doing it with everybody. I just can't be on for the time. What what people aren't noticing about that Eve contract is it's not that the player doesn't want to haul it necessarily. They take very little risk with the insurance system that exists. So again, you put up the contract and say 1 million credits, it goes in escrow. The person who accepts the contract, the hauler, pays 1 million credits to accept the contract, does the hauling, and assumes all the risk. The person who created the materials at their base, the 250 SCU a barrel that you're saying, has no risk. If the contract fails, they don't get their barrel. That's the risk. But they get paid for the loss of material. Why that works is in Eve, that material turns into something. In Star Citizen, at the moment, that material turns into nothing. There's no risk, right? So you obviously want to take that barrel and move it to a place where you craft in Eve. In Star Citizen, you don't care. You're just selling it because the game has no depth to it at the moment. But if you start adding that depth with crafting, all of a sudden, it matters a little bit more, right? No, you don't need quanta dots. I mean, that's kind of the point of the conversation is quanta becomes way less important if you create tools for players to interact with each other. I think players would way rather interact with each other in positive ways than interact with each other in negative ways or interact with an NPC in a meaningless way, right? So that's my story time for today. I've been really getting into it. I've been obsessing over it. I have played Eve for exactly 1 day for a couple of hours, and I knew it was going to be my game that I would obsess with, and I didn't want to obsess over a game like that, so I put it down. But the more I hear about it, the more I feel pieces of Eve can be brought to Star Citizen. I do not want Star Citizen to become Eve. I think it is a little too niche, a little too intense for the player base. But I think that we can create really fun interactions in our game with the world they're building, with some of the systems that they have in place. I think it'll be really fun. And I'm obsessed with this cargo system. So I wanted to share it with you guys. And essentially, I think I'll just clip this out of Twitch and put it up on YouTube so that audience can see this as well and just get a sense for what I'm talking about. Because it's awesome. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have this, right? Just no reason why we shouldn't have it. We should be interacting with each other more, and they should. It's so hard to look at Invictus. I saw somebody say this in my Discord this morning. You look at the email promoting Invictus. There's no mention of the fixes of 3.23.0 coming into 3.23.1. It's all about buy. You know? There's no mention of the improvements. Yes, is Yano, that's him. It's relatively a boring watch, but I'm enthralled by the gameplay. So that's my happy rant for the day, I guess. I could just see it happening. It's possible. Will they do it? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that they have any desire to make the game yet. I'm convinced they have every desire to still make this a storefront and not an experience for us to play in. But could they? Could that system be applied to this game? Absolutely. Absolutely.